Go live. Go live. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? Can I find some stuff? Yeah. Oh, that's some. There you go. Empty. So should probably go in the bin. Ah, that's got some stuff in it. Welcome to, honestly, part 3 of 4. My gum. I recorded part 4 of 4 today. Well, finished this recording. It's 2 hours long. It's coming out on Saturday night. If I'm happy with the Neptune video, which is what I'm recording for Friday, which is what I've got recorded for Friday, but I'm not sure if I'm happy with it. Neptune class. I think it needs something more. I think it needs some more slides added to it. Anyway, hello everyone. How are we all doing? How are we doing? Yes, we're live. Hello, Servant Curto. Hello, Jacob. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Carver Gasberg. Hello, Michael Gooch. Hello, Steve Clarke. Hello, Carver Gasberg. Hello, Steve Richards. Hello, All92. Hello, DG40. Hello, Wayne. And hello, Felix B. And hello, Tim and Ellen. Hello, everyone. Right, and one thing I will add now is I will be on Discord after this. In the general chat to answer more questions if people have them, etc. I will also add, and I will add this as a very big ad, this is not going to be a short video. Oh, it makes more sense in this division. But honestly, there was part of me which was thinking, going, I could end up making this a 6-parter. And I have sort of divided this into 2. In that the long patrol videos, the recorded videos, are more about the ship's design and the individual ships, and the lives are more about what they do and what they get up to, because that makes life easier for everyone. Also, in good news, I have things on way for the computer, so hopefully they'll improve the computer. Lots of things on way. But, yeah. Kirsten Fisher, narrator, 5 hours later. I do have 5 litres of iron brewing for this evening. Hello, Felix. Hello, Christian. Hello, Josh Vonk. Hello, Mystic everyone. Hello, Dan. Not good, so good. New phone, going 5G, but I can't get a silly thing to pair my hearing aids. Before I do start, I am going to say this. If you are a patron, or wish to be a patron, there is a link down below. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the patron suggestions, this is the final day for next month, because for October, for the suggestions to come in, and then the vote will begin tomorrow. So if people have... The vote will start tomorrow, at roughly 7 o'clock, at whatever time the next video goes live. Mum and sister are driving me up the wall, actually, honestly. But, you know, that's life. They're not very well, and frankly, I'm getting fed up with having the same conversation with them because they're not well. And as much as you love someone, and as much as you care for them, at a certain point, having the same conversation over and over again does feel like slamming your head into a brick wall. You sort of go, I was calm the first 70 times I had this conversation. Now I am starting to get to the point of just no. Now, I hope you didn't find my way of saying the demise of 1898 pre-dread formidable condescending. In my experience, Knight 681, and I'm going to say this, I didn't really care a jot, but my experience of whenever I deal with things, if I worry I'm coming across as condescending, or think I'm coming across as condescending enough that I actually mention it out loud, the odds are I may not have been condescending, but I might have been rude. But, no, I just took it as you being you. I didn't worry. Because, yeah. You summed it up in one sentence, whereas I was giving it a few paragraphs and a discussion. That's fine. Yours is the If I was going to put it in academic terms, you gave it what I would call the 2-mark answer. I was going for the 15-mark answer. It's difference. There's nothing rude about it, it's just difference. Vying for the record of Drac. No, I think he and I think honestly I might have actually got the record so far thanks to the Dreadnought broadcasts. Because when I did the Day of the Dreadnought broadcasts, and I basically broadcast for, I think, something like 18 hours on across that day. But I did it across several different videos, because basically I arranged in that I was going to have some long patrol or recorded videos go live to allow me time to eat and go to the loo. So I'm not sure whether that one did win it or not. So, today we are into torpedo boats of the Pacific, Baltic and Black Sea theatres. And someone already commented about how there are American vessels involved in the European theatres. There were. There are also a lot of British vessels involved, and British design vessels involved in the Pacific. But I've left one in the European and I've put one in the Pacific. Why? Because honestly, both have long and interesting design stories. And if I try to intermingle them, they just become confused. And they really would become confused, because here is the dirty little secret about the Anglo-American torpedo boat projects. A lot of the companies talk to each other, and a lot of the companies share ideas. Why? Because a lot of the companies are competing for the same yachting market and share the same people as civilian companies. Same customers. In fact, I'm going to go now and say this. At a certain point in the recorded video, I talk about the Huckins company. Now, if you haven't heard of Huckins, then you've missed out, because they still create motorboats. And you can still get some very nice motorboats designed in the lines of what they were, their torpedo boats were designed during World War II. So I'm just going to say this, pretty much the only one I think you can go and buy from, because I don't think I don't think Fairmile Marine are still going. No, I'm fairly sure they're not still going. Mainly because they were, yeah, they were built by Noel Macklin as a subsidiary of the British government. So, no, they were definitely... Although the Fairmile H was pretty cool. But no, they were not. They're not independent. But Huckins still are, and you can get some jolly good boats from them. Shameless book plug. Yes, basically Dan Freeman. But also some of the American subsidiaries got involved in some of the designing towards the British motor torpedo boats, and vice versa. Nice different. I bet you didn't know what plane crash you mentioned was in yesterday's video. Honestly, I did, but I wasn't going into that much detail about the plane crash. I didn't think it needed to go into it, because it wasn't relevant to the video. But it was just something I was adding on, because I found it's sad that the family not only lost the father, they lost the dog and the son in service of the country. And there are families like that. You know, my own family's had some similar experiences at points in World War I and II. So I brought it up, but again, the loss of the aircraft in World War II wasn't really relevant to the story of the loss of the service of the ship. But thank you for adding the information into the comment section. It made it interesting for people who are reading it. I'm sure. Darren, the USNR had fairly similar specifications of companies from both sides of the Atlantic bid for both navies. Yeah, but also the Americans have some really stupid ideas going on. Now, first things first, I'm going to start off, before I get into anything else, explaining something. So let's see if this image shows up. And the extra image. No, that's not showing up. Come on, work. Thank you, XSplit. Ugh, gone in the wrong place, but it works. So, when we start talking about the American vessels, which we're going to be talking about in a second. Get that up to the right size. And boom, down there. We're going to keep referencing something called the Sea Sled. Now, here is the thing. The Hickman Sea Sled is invented and provides a solution for the US Navy in roughly the World War I period. They are looking into torpedo boats. It has an interesting experience with US politicians. And so I want you to think about this. This is a catamaran or tunnel hull. It uses reduced. Well, it uses the gas, the air trapped between the hull surface and the water to reduce friction. And it's very, very fast. Does have some issues, but it is very, very fast. I want you to remember that when we start talking about everything else that comes in. Nice to say, everyone. You're jumping ahead. You're asking a question. You keep asking the same question. Did these vessels sink anything in, the Pacific, etc.? I will get to those things as we go through the video. But at the moment, let's start off with the start of the history before wars even began. And let's keep things respectful in the chat. Okay? Be kind, everyone. I don't want Dan to start having to block people. We know how good he is with a block button. So again, it starts off with the coastal motorboats. And it starts off with the Americans looking at the British coastal motorboats and going, "We have an idea!" And the British going, "Oh good lord, what's happening now?" Well, the Americans have an idea. They really do have an idea. Their idea is that they've got this very cool inventor who produces in August 1914 this idea of a sea sled being used as a motor torpedo boat. And he presents his proposal to Rear Admiral Taylor, who was at that point the chief of the US Navy's Bureau of Construction and Repair. And, well, Hickman completed by September 1914. So he proposed this idea in August 1914. America's not in the war yet. And by September 1914, America's still not in the war, but, it's been a month, completed plans for a 50-foot sea sled torpedo boat. Joseph Daniels, the US Secretary of the Navy, rejected the proposal since the US was not at war. That's about the best time to prepare for war, honestly. I have to admit, the best time to prepare for war is when you're not at war. Honestly, trying to prepare for war when you're at war is blooming difficult. People keep blowing up your logistics and interfering with your infrastructure and just generally having a vote about everything you're doing. So, you preferably want to do it before they have that. And the trouble is, Hickman is then advised to submit his plans and proposal to British Admiralty, which he did in October. The British Admiralty went, that sounds interesting, but felt no fast boat of 50-foot to 60-foot length would be sufficiently seaworthy for what they needed to do in the North Sea, let alone the North Atlantic. As a result, Hickman, being really an American inventor, but there's a few British ones who do something similar. There's Turbina, etc. So it's a traditional history of this. Built his own 41-foot vessel, capable of carrying a single 18-inch Whitehead Mark V torpedo. This vessel demonstrated a top speed of 35 knots in rough winter seas off Boston. And this was done in front of US and foreign representatives. However, he still received no contracts, mostly because quite a lot of people were seasick afterwards and going, oh my lord, he dragged us out there. At this point, the Admiralty representative there, a Lieutenant G.C. Hampton, started having an idea, and he got together with Lieutenants Bremner and Anson and approached the Thornycroft Company. And their efforts led to the coastal motorboat, this thing, which went into service in April 1916. So basically, the Americans had had a good idea. The British had looked at the American one and gone, it's a nice idea, but we don't think it quite suits our needs. And then the General Board of the USN gets involved in August 1915. I'm just not sure why, but they do. And they try and order a boat from someone else. And it proves pretty much atrocious. Although the phrase, I do love the phrase that comes up, it was deemed not a success. No, it was deemed terrible and likely to kill its own crew, but it's fun. Now, this is where life gets slightly more cool. Because with them giving him money, he uses his designs from September 1914, his unsuccessful bid for the project which the board had just funded, and a few other ideas, and builds what's called the C-378. Now, it was completed and fully tested just in time for Armistice. Yes, basically the Americans had a great idea from August 1914, and it was early 1918, it was mid to late 1918 actually, when they finally get it delivered. This had a fully loaded weight of 56,000 pounds, or 25 tons, could have a top speed of 37 knots, one with 1,400 horsepower, maintained an average speed of 34.5 knots in a winter northwest and northeaster storm of 12 to 14 foot seas, and, well, that was a pretty darn good vessel. However, war was over, we no longer need to invest in this stuff. The war is over! We don't need to invest in it anymore. We don't need to have it at all. At all. No, no, no. So all these boats are turned into rescue boats and seaplane tenders during the 20s and 30s. Let get so bad that in 1922, the US Navy actually orders British Royal Navy, to use the phrase, but British coastal motorboats. They order both a 45-foot and a 55-foot variant of them for testing. The larger one is in use until 1930. And this leads us to the start of the American competition. Oh joy. Because in 1938, the USN decides to have another competition. And they make a very firm point. They exclude the sea sled. They exclude Hickman's ideas completely. They request competitive bids for different types of motor torpedo boats. They want a 54-foot, that's a 16-meter boat, and a 70-foot, that's a 21-meter boat. But whatever they do, they request you do not use Hickman boats. So, these were the boats they've been using for the last 20 years, that they had experience of, and that they had managed to, that could presumably fill many of the roles required from them. Especially once you start to get into the duties they want from the boats. So, yeah. I'm not sure if I want to say this, but it is classic Western procurement. It's classic anyone's procurement. We have a design which works, but Lord help us, we won't use it. No, no, no. We won't improve on an existing design. We won't iterate on something which works. We will boldly go into new territory. So, bye-bye, Sea Sled. It was nice knowing you. And I'm going to answer some of the questions in the chat. Hello, Jank Ray. Hello, Don Console Log. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm presuming that's your name. Hello, young world, Giovanni. That is a long name, but a cool one. I'm just going to call you Don Console, because that just rolls off my tongue, and it sounds quite fun. Sorry about that, but yeah. It's like Wayne's World of Science and Technology usually just gets shortened to Wayne. I do apologise, but it just makes my life easier. Hello, Paul Amos. How you doing? And let's see. Wayne, my point was building a boat doesn't see where it just doesn't make sense. You essentially know better. Oh, you sweet summer child. In nicest way, building boats which aren't seaworthy. Oh, I wish this is not even the worst of the occasions. Okay, we have got, nice way, tonight's topics are going to be the USNs, the IJNs, and the Soviet Union Navy. This is gonna be fun. Dozens, Night 6 everyone, but also dozens got just sold around the world and ended up in strange places. So the USN was so impressed with the Sea Sled, etc. Basically, the USN were repeatedly embarrassed by the Sea Sled. The entire development process in World War I is the USN trying to pick anything else and then finding that the Sea Sled is the thing which works. So the USN had been embarrassed by the Sea Sled for about the previous 20-odd years at this point. What kind of tonnage limit size would you place on motor torpedo gunboats for World War II? I would say once you're getting over 100, 120 tons, you're getting into interesting territory, and there's an argument with your still motor torpedo boat. A motor torpedo ship, maybe. But it's an interesting one. This will be a comedy stream. Not because of me actually doing any jokes, but because some of the people are strange. Now we get on to the joyous thing that is the USN's PT boat competition entrance. And please note, this is not an exhaustive list of entrants. I have no desire to go through the exhaustive list of entrants, because honestly, some of the boats which are entered should never have been even looked at. They should have been drawn on a piece of paper, and someone should have scrunched them up and chucked them at a wall. And preferably, if they'd gone in a bin, that would have been insulting to the bin. They needed to be fall on the floor and then be picked up and put in the bin. They weren't even allowed the level of cool that is being chucked and going straight in the bin in one throw. Not that. Now, never underestimate the power of spite in defense procurement. I agree, in the nicest way. Britain, you just have to look at what's happened to us recently a few years ago when the government was in a anyone but BAE phase, and literally that's arguably what's led to the whole Ajax saga, because we could have just gone with the CV-90, which would have fitted pretty much all the tasks and probably would have been in service by now, because it was a mature and viable design with lots of partners built into it, whereas Ajax was Ajax. Who knows, it might work, but, you know, at the moment it's still looking iffy to me. It depends which of my army friends I talk to, whether they're telling me it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, or it's atrocious and they never want to go near it. Interesting enough, most of the ones who are on the latter ones are ones who've ridden in the back of one. The ones who've driven it, or tried to, operate it like it, the ones who've ridden the back of it and had the hearing issues afterwards, are less keen on it. Look, Jack Wright, don't worry, in the nicest way, you are going to learn that there is actually even have been programs which have been even worse than LCS. That's coming in this. So, the USN puts out their competitions, and they really encourage designs, because here is the thing. The winning design proposals would each receive a prize of $15,000, with $1,500 for designs that reached the final part of the competition, each to be given out on the 30th of March 1939. Their competitions, they're searching for 4 separate types of boat. A 165-foot subchaser, a 110-foot subchaser, a 70-foot motor torpedo boat, and a 54-foot motor torpedo boat. That's what they're hunting for. The 70-foot motor torpedo boat was not to exceed 80 feet and was to carry at least 2 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 depth charges, and 2 50 cal machine guns. Woohoo! Now, it was required to achieve 40 knots, which would be the same top speed as the smaller boat, but it was to have an operating radius of at least 275 miles at 40 knots and 550 miles at cruising speed. Let's consider back to the sea sled earlier. What was that top speed in... Yeah, the C-378 made a top speed of 37 knots on 1,400 horsepower in 1918. So with modern engines, etc., it could have done really well. But no. Okay, alright. What's the smaller boat proposal? Well, that was to weigh no more than 20 tons. So that it could be easily transported. Its maximum top speed was also, as said, 40 knots. But it only had an operating radius of 120 miles at that speed and 240 miles at cruising speed. The armament for the smaller vessel was to either be 2 torpedoes and 2 depth charges, or 50 cal machine guns and a smokescreen generator. So could either come in torpedo, torpedo and anti-submarine, or gunboat version. Now, you'll be glad to know that the US Navy received 24 design proposals for the small boat, and 13 design proposals for the larger boat. This is what I love about the US Navy. At this point, they look at them and they go, of the 24 designs they received for the small boat, they decide 3 of them are actually worth looking at, and of the 13 proposals for the 70-foot boat, they decide 5 of them are of interest. Okay. Please note, at least one of these manufacturers here are not on any of those lists. Not there. At all. Shumran, there is an argument to give contracts to Avengers so they keep solvent. Or so you have. Well, here's the thing. By this point, I think Hickman's... I'm not sure if Hickman's company was still going. Yeah, it was still going. The thing is, he was happy to let other people use his style and his design. So the thing is, the other companies could have gone and based it off Hickman's design and used his ideas, but they weren't even allowed to use that. Can I have the Huckins 72-foot design? Yeah. That would make sense. Oh, we'll get onto this. Right. So, the designs? Well, what happens? A company called Sparkman and Stevens in March 1939 wins the prize for the 70-foot class. And George Crouch of Henry B. Nevins Incorporated won the design for the 54-foot class, and this is in March 1939. Here is the great thing. Crouch, after he'd won the prize and won the competition, wrote and stated, Hickman's sea sled design will be far superior in either rough or smooth waters to that of the best possible V-bottom or hard chine design. In fact, he informed the Bureau of Ships that a sea sled was the best type of vessel for the job. Absolutely. Unsurprisingly, this now made him target numero uno of the Bureau of Ships. And so, Mr. Crouch, well, sadly enough, doesn't have that much more experience with the US Navy. And this, by the way, where is he coming from? He won 3 of the first 3 places in the 1924 Gold Cup of the American Powerboat Association with his design of speedboats. This is a man who knew his speedboats completely, and he did very, very well with them. But no. Wayne, we have a whole world. In nicest way, there's even people who call torpedoes babies in today's competition. I'm going to avoid getting distracted with the whole concept of the MTB carrier. The designs of the Soviet Union come at the end of the video. So. At this point, they award contracts for construction. Higgins Industries gets asked to build 2 boats, PT5 and 6, to the Sparkman and Stevens design, scaled up to a length of roughly 81 feet because it was found not to be long enough. Remember, their criteria was it had to be smaller than 80 feet, and now they are asking for it to be scaled up to 81 foot because it's found not to be long enough. Life is just having fun. And then they go for June 1939, and they go to the Fogel Boat Yard. And they order PT1 and 2, ordered after PT5 and 6. And then they go to Fisher Boat Works and order PTs 3 and 4 from all for the Crouch design. So that's PTs 1, 2, 3, and 4 all ordered to the Crouch design. 2 from Fogel and 2 from Fisher. And then they go to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And they ask for PT 7 and 8 to be built to an 81-foot boat designed by the Bureau of Ships. Please note, this is the Bureau of Ships design. Yeah, the Bureau of Ships, the Navy, the U.S. Navy's Board of Inspection Survey report decides that the Bureau of Ships is... this is what they describe it as. Oh. Now, what's fun is that ones at the Philadelphia Navy Yard are constructed out of aluminium and had 4 engines. Higgins themselves decide to build an additional PT6 Prime, which they redesigned themselves, using their own methods of construction. And then went one step further and built PT70 that incorporated some improvements over PT6 Prime. And yes, I do admit that Andrew Higgins was basically following in the Hickman Sea Sled scenario. I am building it myself. Look how much better it is. Right then. So, it's now time for Elco to enter the mix. Oh yeah, it's fun. They are all sent, all the constructed torpedo boats are sent for testing, as well as, you know, changes in armament, and all sorts of things up to, you know, see how they can meet the performance specifications. And so, the Navy requests further investigation. They wanted this to be done until a satisfactory working design can be obtained. By the way, if this sounds like the LCS program to you, I swear this is the model of the LCS program. In that they start off and they're basically going, we will honestly pick one. We will pick one. But you're all going to have to keep competing. We will pick one. And, well, at this point... And remember, we're in 1939, 1940. Henry R. Sutphen of the Electric Launch Company, Elco, and I'm going back again because this is, I keep forgetting how long this one is going to be. Well, he takes his design team, which are people like Irwin Chase, Bill Fleming, and Glenville Tremaine, which is one of the coolest names. Glenville Tremaine, that just sounds cool. To the UK in February. He took them to there in February 1939. And this was at the USN's request. So the USN is running this program, all this going on. And then they get the chairman and the designers of Elco, another company, which are not in this process at this time, to go and visit the UK and see their designs. They visit the British Powerboat Company. They purchased the 70-foot private venture motor torpedo design, PV70. They purchased the design. They also purchased some of the systems which are used to make it, some of the blocks, which have been designed by Hubert Scott Payne, another powerboat racer like Mr. Crouch. And basically, they renamed this design PT9 later, and it's PT9 which becomes the prototype for the Elco PT boats. In fact, in late 1939, with the competition still going on, the USN contracts Elco to build 11 copies of PT9. But it's not over. It's not over. In 1940, in October 1940, the USN and Huckins Yacht Corporation have another conversation. And the Navy agreed to provide engines, and Huckins agreed to build the PT boat at his own expense. The caveat, and there is always a caveat, was upon completion, it would be offered to the Navy for a later sum. This is where he builds the 72-foot design. Later designated PT-69, but starting life as MT-72. And on this vessel, which Huckins sold, and it must have been a loss leader, because on the entirety of this, they made a profit of $28.60. Okay. Alamorph, didn't the LCS boats, the modern ones, fall apart because... Don't get me started. It's just fun. Well, 92, but this committee process sounds pretty... The decision makers may have stakes in companies or their friends may. I have no idea. I haven't investigated them at its post. But, yeah, it just gets worse, okay? Black Mouse, was there any attempt to put the autoloading 3-inch 50 on motor gunboats? Not to my knowledge. So, they go off and they have a testing, and this is where these results come from. Okay, they decide to have open ocean trials. And this is all reviewed by the Board of Inspection and Survey, which is headed by Rear Admiral John Wilcox Jr. The boats involved were PT-6, 81-foot Higgins boat with 3 Packard engines, PT-8, the 81-foot Philadelphia Navy Yard aluminium hull boat, which had 2 Allison 2,000 horsepower engines, and I'm still not quite sure, but a single Hull Scott 550 horsepower engine. Why they couldn't design it to take 3 of the Allison engines, I don't know. Why they went with an aluminium hull, I don't know. Aluminium hulls and the ocean are not good things. There's this thing called galvanic corrosion, and it's just not nice for aluminium hulls unless you have enough sacrificial anodes. But we'll be getting more into that later because it will rear its head again. It's just so fun. It keeps coming. Never stops. PT-20, which was a 77-foot Elco clone of PT-9, which had 3 Packard 1200 horsepower engines, which were equipped with apparently special propellers, and had strengthening added to hull framing and deck because they had noticed that the inspection and survey were putting accelerometers inside their ships, inside the boats, to work out how much pounding they were going to take in the waves. Oh. They also had PT 26, 30, 31, and 33, which were the same, were also versions of the Alco vessel, but they were fitted with standard propellers and without special strengthening. And then you have PT 69, the Huckins 72-footer, with 4 Packard 1200 horsepower engines. And then you have the PT-70, which was the 76-foot Higgins boat. No, I'm not sure why Higgins have both a 76-foot and an 81-foot boat in the race, but they do, just for fun. And the Royal Navy, courtesy of the Royal Navy and Higgins, won the 70-foot Emirate motor rescue boat, as built for the Royal Navy by Higgins, with 3 Hull Scott 900 horsepower engines. I mean, literally, there is part of me which is wondering if this is being rigged to go for the British designs. So, they go through the ocean trials, and the trials are conducted under 2 conditions. With 24 21-inch torpedoes, and with two 21-inch torpedoes and 10 300-pound depth charges. All various other things. Boats would have their tactical parameters each determined by photographs from an airship. So the idea was that they would be photographed from the airship above and see how clearly you could work out their details. And it also allowed people a bird's eye view of monitoring the testing. It's just, it's fun. It's, how do I put this? It's referred to an extent as the plywood derby. Now, one of the things I would say with this is that, very quickly, there is a small problem I would like to point out. When you are measuring boats as to how they hit waves and how much pounding they take, you have to adjust for certain things. If you are going line abreast between a group of boats across the sea, you will be affected by certain issues. Where you are in that line, and how the waves, and how the seabed, what's happening on the seabed, will have an impact on the waves and the force of the waves you will hit. They'll be similar, but they won't be exactly the same. Added to that, you will also have the fact that the people who are driving the boats, the pilots, may take slightly different approaches to waves. So, when the accelerometer decides to rank you all as, and I should put that on manual push, but I will turn it on to manual push. Can I just turn it? No, it's just allowing me transition loop forever once. No, manual. No, okay. Not allowing me manual at the moment. We'll change that. Now, with all these factors in, it's unsurprising that the Philadelphia Navy Yard, the PT-8, the vessel which, if you remember correctly, was made of aluminium and weighs the most, has the least pounding. Second was the Huckins PT-69. The PT-69, of course, was the Huckins designed vessel, which was 72 foot long. So, this design. So that was the second least pounding of all of them. Third was the Higgins PT-6, and the last were the Elco 77 footers. So their entire test was to work out which was the vessel which was going to take the least damage from the sea and the less strain on the crew. So theoretically, the winner should be obvious. It becomes especially true when you start to look at the speeds that they achieve at various points. Because the Elco is fastest when they do their weighted speed tests. But sadly enough, the reason the Elco wins is because the Huckins had some issues with its build stringer failure. The Elco got 27.5 knots, the Higgins got 27.2 knots, the Higgins MREB and the Philadelphia Navy Yard boats both got 24.8 knots, which again might explain some of the pounding issue, because if you're a slower boat, you might not, again, be hit as much. Now, one of the other interesting things was that the accelerometers apparently went beyond the normal range of their instruments and were therefore considered inaccurate during testing. Fun times. So what happens? Well, I would say for all round and round, the Huggins boat, the 72-foot design, represents a fairly good option. If you could manage to get it to carry 4 21-inch torpedo tubes with slight expansion, it would seem to be fairly decent. Very little tendency to pound in seaway. Manufacturing turning circle, very good. Actually, it's got, of the 3, it's got the smallest turning circle. Fittings and finish appropriate for a motor torpedo boat, and cost $263,500 per boat. That sounds useful. Oh, you have no idea, because the Soviets go really far. But what actually happens? Well, here are the final recommendations after all that testing, and it goes in August 1941. So, that the Packard power plant, having been found highly satisfactory, be adopted as standard for all future construction. Lucky Packard. That the once ordnance installation of future motor torpedo boats consist of two torpedo tubes, machine guns, and depth charges. You might notice that all of them contain 4, so no one's really paying attention to this. The Huggins 78-foot PT-69 be considered acceptable for immediate construction. The Higgins 80-foot design, suitably reduced in size to carry such ordnance loads as to be required by a navy, be considered acceptable for immediate construction. The Dielco 77-foot design be considered acceptable for future construction, provided change in lines are made to reduce tendency to pound and seaway, and the structure be strengthened in manner acceptable to the Bureau of Ships. That the Philadelphia 81-foot boat be stripped of its excess weight and re-engined with 3 Packard engines. Now, at this point, you've done all these trials, all these rules. You would think, okay, they're going to listen to these people. They are going to listen to them. They are going to carry it through. And the orders are ordered to Higgins and Huggins. They order, next 2 orders of pre-war boats, PT boats, PD-71 to PT-102, are ordered from Higgins and Huggins. However, here is the interesting thing. Elco, the ones who, by any stretch, probably lost the competition in comparison to the others, end up building 326 boats. Higgins, well, Higgins boats are well known, and they produce a fair number of those. A fair number of Higgins boats. And Huggins end up supplying just 2 squadrons. The ones who have performed best end up supplying roughly 20 boats. So let's go through that again. This vessel, this PT boat, it's a lovely vessel. It really is. But it didn't win the competition. And in fact, it's not really part of the competition. And yet it's the one which is built by far and away the most. And it's also the most famous. Now, the reason why Higgins don't have as many orders as they probably would have liked to is because the Higgins end up going into producing a huge number of landing craft. And basically, the Higgins design teams and work teams get completely focused on producing landing craft. So that's understandable. But the Huckins Yacht Company, they're just ignored. You could have scaled up their design, you could have scaled up their work, but they don't. Yes, because of the other Higgins boat. Basically, yes. All of the various other Higgins vessels come in and they are really, really useful. They're landing craft. And so that's what they're focusing on. But the Elco 80-foot PT boat is what gets built. They operate all around the world. The actual classification is more of the Elco boats were built than any other type of motor torpedo boat. I'm not quite sure about that. I would, there is part of me which is, well, I'm thinking that's probably stretching the definition because you can, broadly speaking, claim that because officially certain things officially certain things are not you're not quite sure whether they classify as motor torpedo boats, despite the fact they can take torpedoes. They're not called motor torpedo boats. I'm talking about the Fairmile family here. But my strong suspicion is that the Fairmile family do outnumber the Elco family. Purely from the point of view that for the Americans, really, PT boats are a part of their offensive operations, whereas for the British, they're part of their defensive operations. So when you have that as a requirement, it does work. But the trouble is, quite a lot of Fairmile Bs are used as also sub-chasers and something, and so they carry, as I've talked about them before, they carried far more in the way of depth charges than torpedoes. Now, this class is made famous by the whole John Kennedy PT-109 saga. And really, they deserve to be famous. But they are good, but it's a case of by your own metrics, the actual recommendations were immediate construction. Immediately placed into production for the Huckins and Higgins boats. Immediately placed into construction. And this is the Higgins boat. Now, the Higgins boats, please note, they are good vessels. And they are used for a lot of operations. The first Higgins boats were used in the Battle of Aleutian Islands as part of Squadrons 13 and 16. And they were also used in the Mediterranean against the Germans. They took part in D-Day landings. When the US Navy really wanted to deploy some really interesting boats, these were what they sent. They were really capable vessels. And they're good. But this Huckins, and as I said, Huckins Yacht Company are still going. If you want a Huckins yacht, you can buy a motor yacht from them. So if you want to buy a vessel which is still built with the same techniques and shaping as a motor torpedo boat from World War II, but you want it brand new, and so you don't have to, treat it like a veteran, you can actually chuck it around like a newbie, you can buy it off them. Now, this used a quadraconic planing hull design. Now, why was that interesting? Because that is, how do I put this politely, a method of building a hull very strongly. And the fact is, Huckins actually licensed the quadraconic hull that he used for his PT boat construction to Elco, Higgins, and the Philadelphia Navy Yards. So he allowed them to use the patented laminated keel system, which increased hull strength, but neither Elco nor Higgins chose to use it for their boats. Huckins' yard was not provided any government support to construct a larger facility prior to the war, and as such, they produced at their civilian facility. And Squadron 26 is a good example. They were constantly providing the ready boat operations and the fleet torpedo boat training in the oceans around Midway and Hawaii during the last 2 years of the war, because they were constantly ruggedly at sea. But that's one of the reasons why they were only able to build one per month, which is why you have so few built. Basically, no one invested in Huckins to allow them to expand to build. If I won the Euro Millions, I would be going to Huckins. I would probably be. Let's put it this way. Even if I didn't want, if I just won, which part of the lottery do I actually play? Because I occasionally do buy tickets. I buy the money for life, the 30-year money. I would spend some of the money on a Huckins boat. I think I have already picked out which one I would get, actually. Because I was looking at them earlier this week. And if I quickly change that one, add source. So we now have Huckins yacht showing on. They do lovely boats, but if you view the new constructions available, I think that looks. I'm not sure who Cindy Purcell is. I don't really mind, don't care. But I think these boats look lovely. And I would say a very nice 56, or the Hybrid Sportsman looks exactly like a scaled-down version of Motor Torpedo boat. And I think that looks like a cute boat. Look at that. Doesn't that look fun? Ooh, there's a virtual tool. Oh, hello. I'm going up here. Ooh, I'm in the bridge. Ooh, that looks nice and iconic position. And a space down below. And that's fairly comfortable. Oh, there's a decent loo. Decent little kitchen area. Yeah. Heads and galley look all good to me. Although, there's a TV and that's basically obviously become a bed. Yeah, you could have fun with this. 2 up front. Yeah. And down the rear. Ooh. Nice place to have some more dining. Ooh, is that an outdoor barbecue? I like that. Definitely. Oh, I'm up in the front. Hello. Yeah, nice looking vessel. Anyway, that's enough of me enjoying the Huckins. Apparently Packard Marines were shipped to Soviets. They were. It was good for the Soviets they were, because actually the engines worked. Trent Lager, the politics of war production, US and procurement is likely what a bit Huckins on about. Oh, it did. It did. Yeah, the standing room in the engine compartment was especially appreciated by them. But that is our American torpedo boat saga. And you might be noticing that that has taken up roughly an hour of our time. But it's not stopped yet. Because you see, there was a small problem. Because they didn't have enough and they had so many of those Higgins boats, what they ended up doing, and the landing craft, and they had so many landing craft to protect, etc., was they had problems. And a good example is from Omaha Beach and Okinawa Beach. And some of you might have remembered that when I was sort of talking about this particular fund they had was measures against suicide boats. And the anti-small craft screen was formed primarily for night duty, though it could be used in daylight if required. Patrol line was from the flanks of the transport area northward as far as Ishima, and south around the tip of Okinawa-Shima, and up the southeast coast to Chinwan. Each station covered an area 3 miles long by 2 miles wide, the line of stations being about 1 mile offshore. Each station was occupied by an LCI-type gunboat, fitted with radar if possible, and each group of 5 or 6 gunboats was allotted a cruiser and a destroyer, which patrolled to seaward in support of the line of gunboats, the group being termed a flycatcher team. So basically, these come in because of dealing with some of the Japanese torpedo boats and motor boats and their sort of some of their suicide boats. Basically, the idea is this: the Americans have built their torpedo boats as focused they can be on torpedo construction. Whilst they can adapt them and they try to adapt them and add more guns, etc., and they do, and honestly, their crews are on a constant, ongoing program. They can't carry enough for the job they need to do. In this case. So, the landing craft infantry gun, which were basically designed at first to provide fire support to troops going ashore, and to give them more firepower coming into the beachhead, were then put into patrol duties. Now, I would say one of the interesting things that the Royal Navy finds when they're watching this for Okinawa, and the reason they have these reports, so the Royal Navy's watching this and going, you need dog boats. And the Americans are going, well, we have these. And the Royal Navy's going, you need dog boats. Your motor torpedo boats are all designed for very, very fine fighting and torpedo attack. You're designing the fast and to do the precision. They're not all-rounders. You designed very good boats, but they're not all-rounders. No, we got these. The reason the British at the end of World War II are shifting dog boats over to the Pacific and starting to move their torpedo boats in that direction, take them that way, is literally because when they're looking at the idea of going into Japan, and if you invade Japan, that's the task they've got to do. They need to be able to protect these things, and that's what they're sending their dog boats to. Because really, these vessels are not designed for that. They do it, and they do well. The fact that I don't think any of them are still around to this day, if anyone has found one, it'd be interesting to see. But the thing is, these vessels, they are doing that duty because there aren't enough torpedo gunboats going around. And the reason there aren't enough torpedo gunboats going around, you can argue, is because if you look at the various designs, this is a very nice vessel, but it kind of reminds me of the Vosper. Smaller ones. It is very much a torpedo boat. The all-rounder vessels are the Higgins and the Huckins. Look at their shaping, look at their styling. Those are far more all-rounder vessels in terms of how you can muck around with them. And whilst these do get upgunned by their crews and do get made very interesting and very capable by the crews, and please, I'm not saying they're not brave or they're not good at their jobs or great they are, but I'm saying that if you want something to do the motor gunboat role of defense rather than attack, then you need something which is slightly more Higgins or Huckins than Elco. And because you don't have enough of those, you end up going landing craft infantry large. Right then. Oh. Mm-hmm. Trent, are you going to cover the 63-foot and 85-foot US Army Air Force rescue boats in this presentation? No. Mainly because if I cover them as well, this video, and if I had covered them as well, there are other boats then I have to cover from the US ends. And when I cover all those boats, it would have turned into a 2-hour discussion of the US Navy, and I wouldn't have got to anyone else. And this video series would have turned from being a 2-part, 1 live, 1 long patrol, already become a 4-parter, 2 lives, 2 long patrols, into a 6-parter. So I cut it off somewhere. Well, there is an advantage to drinking soft drinks. Right then, so we're now into the IGN torpedo boat scenario, and Lord help us all. Honestly, Lord help us all. Look, the IGN are not necessarily a bad navy when it comes to their design. They are just... How do I put this politely? They are just focused on one thing. And the trouble is, what they're focused on is not... I say this sadly. It's not what necessarily they need to be focused on. What they needed to be focused on, and what they should have arguably been focused on, was what do you need to win a war? What do you need to defend your fleet? What they instead focused on was what do they need to fight above themselves. Let me put that better, because I can put that better. The IJN were so focused on building ships up a level so they could fight above themselves rather than fight their equals or their equivalents, that they lost sight of what their original vessels were for. And these torpedo boats are built under the ruling, of course, which is that vessels under a certain tonnage you can build as many of them as you like, blah 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 blah. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we consider under the various treaties, vessels under 1,000 tons, pretty much you can blanket build as many as you like. Remember I've talked about Article 8 in the London Treaty, which defines the sloop and basically allows you to build as many as you like under 2,000 tons, as long as they can't go fast and aren't designed for a greater speed of 20 knots and can't carry torpedoes. Well, vessels under 1,000 tons, you can build as many as you like. You can spam them. And this is an area which, honestly, the IGN should have gone, woohoo, we can spam, because they have small yards, they require smaller crews, you can build a lot of them, make them easily upgradable, you can have your anti-submarine warfare escorts, you can have your force multipliers, everything. The trouble is, the Japanese immediately build them and go, right, what we're going to do is we're going to turn them into destroyer killers. Yes! We're going to build vessels which are roughly 1,000 tons, and they're going to be orientated around killing destroyers. They're not going to have torpedoes so they can kill something bigger, which they do have, but they're also going to be able to kill destroyers. Oh, great. As a result, these vessels get incredibly top-heavy. Even the redesigned Otori is far heavier, far more top-heavy than it probably should have been. And this is because the Shidori, which is the first class of them which come out, which they plan to build a lot of, well, Shidori and Tomazoro go out as an exercise. into a very rough sea. And the Tomozoro is lost. It is sunk with all crew. It is gone. And that is a problem. Because A, that's embarrassing, but B, they can work about and try to go, oh, it's because we've built it so top heavy. I thought it was 750 tons and under for London Treaty. It was 1,000 tons. Standard. It was always at about roughly 1,000 tons. And so, yeah, this is a problem. It's just... It's just a constant thing with them. They have constant issues. Because the Japanese are always trying to build things up. Now, we get into other issues, though, as time goes on, because these are not really the boats we're talking about today, but it's worthwhile thinking about them, because when you have that as your starting point, you then start to get into this. Japan builds roughly 451 more conventional motorboats during World War II and the run-up to it. The trouble is, have a look at these boats and think. Which of these is the most common? Which of these is actually getting the most numbers? Is probably the best basis to build from. You're going to go, well, the Type 14 has 81 boats. Okay. Then you go down the list, and you go, well, the Type 38, that is 80. Now, the Type 38, they're 18 meters long, 4 meters, roughly 4.3 meters wide, capable of a 27.5 knot speed, and, well, they are pretty darn tiny. And they don't really get to do much. And they've got a Type 14. Well, that displaces 15 tons. Is a fairly decent vessel overall. Does have guns, does have torpedoes, does have the capabilities it needs. But still, it is limited. It's limited mainly by the fact that the Type 14s, whilst they're roughly 50 foot long and whilst they're all sorts of lovely, they're only armed with a single 25mm cannon and two 18-inch torpedoes and provisions for depth charges. So they're there. They're a fairly decent all-rounder, but they're not that big. Now, please note, someone's probably going to go back to go, but the books say that Japan built in World War II roughly 250 motor torpedo boats. They did during World War II. They had roughly 451 overall. So the other 200 were built prior to World War II. The big problem for the Japanese, and there's all sorts of things coming in here and all sorts of people coming in with ideas of what was wrong. Let me explain what the problem with the Japanese is. Oh, flashy! Okay. If any navy, if any nation needed to actually make a decision in the early 1930s, stick with it and iterate on the design, it was the Japanese. If any nation needed to... Trent Lenger's already brought up quality control in the chat. Well, if any nation needed to standardize on what they were good at, they needed to... It was Japan. And I always think the example of this is the Type 51. Okay, the Type 51 is the one which is where people go, the Japanese were building Schnellboots. They weren't. At no point were they building a Schnellboot. You know how I know they weren't building a Schnellboot? Because they didn't have the capacity to build a Schnellboot. What happens is this. The Japanese hear what's going on in Europe and think the Schnellboot's being successful. What they really need probably is a dogboat, but they decide to go with the Schnellboot. Because they need something that's going to fight things like the Elco, etc. They don't need something which is going to replicate the Elco. They need something which is going to stop the Elco and those things from pushing forward. Now, what they have, and this is where some of the issues come up with when people start talking about quality control and things, is they have a different technological industry. Okay? Countries can be of equivalent advance and scientific capability, but they can have a different tech tree. They can have advance at different levels. They can have different areas of expertise and different areas of built-up. So one of the things that if the Japanese don't have really is the idea of aluminium and mixed iron and wood framing of small boats. They don't really do that. So what happens with the Type 51, and this is important because it's the last one and they get 30. What they should have been doing is probably iterating and growing the Type 14 and working on improving that design and then working on improving that. But instead what they do is they go for it and they go, well, we need a bigger boat. Okay. So they have a very rough drawing, more of a sketch, rough sketch of a Schnellboot. And they have a private boat which is owned by the Mitsu family, which comes from the same constructors as the people building the Schnellboot and have come design. So they look at those and they start to come up with their own idea of what a Schnellboot should be. And they're working away on that, and they produce an absolutely atrocious example of it. But they're producing it using their local techniques. And then they get proper drawings from the Germans of what the boat's supposed to be like. And everyone goes, yeah, then they copy it. No, they can't. Because they don't have the same fabricating capabilities. They don't have the same design history. They don't have the same. So they adapt it all to fit their systems. And because they adapted to fit their systems and they have to make changes to design. And they have to make, because those changes to design lead to issues, they have to make more changes to resolve those issues. So by the time you have a boat being built, you have very different boats than the Schnellboot. It might look similar, but it only looks similar on top. Now, this causes problems. This causes issues. And it causes special issues for understanding, because people start to go, well, it's their Schnellboot. It's not their Schnellboot. It'd be like me going, well, I really like this glass. But I can't blow glass. I'm not good at that. But I have knowledge of how to turn and make clay. And turn that into something. So maybe I'll try and make this and make it from this. And the trouble is my oven's not going to support something that big. And well, clay doesn't really like necessarily that shape. And I end up with this. But yeah, This is my version of this. I produced this. And then someone, many years later, go, well, they are both cups, and they both hold liquid, and they look broadly similar. So they're both Schnellboats. This is the Japanese Schnellboat. It's not. It's just not. Sorry, I'm fed up with it keep changing earlier. Jacob, did you have that mug standby the whole time to make this point after 1.5 hours? No, I was drinking milk earlier. Iron brew, milk. So I don't get it too confused. Winnie is cuter though. I agree Winnie is cuter. I have no idea why people are now talking about Hearts of Iron. So, pretty much, you have that as an issue. And then you have the fact that Japan stubbornly, almost obsessively, seems to be chasing constantly this idea of what a modern great nation should be. Whereas, honestly, in America and Britain, I say this despite the American program, you have almost the policy of, what do we have that'll build boats? Build it. With the Americans and British, they go with the systems available. With the Italians, they build fine works of art, but they still just keep building them to a technology and system which they can do. The Germans try and make perfection, and engineering perfection, and of course then don't manage to build as many as they need. Because when you're chasing engineering perfection, you never get as many as you need. Well, the Japanese are similarly trying to chase perfection, but they're trying to chase someone else's perfection. This is something which, the more and more work I've done and looking into the Japanese, the more and more I've come to believe. The Japanese fundamental problem with their navy and with a lot of their procurement for World War II and for the end of the war years is that they are chasing someone else's view of perfection. And they're constantly trying to build up to build that. And they can't. Because they don't have that tech tree. They're ignoring almost their own tech tree out of belief that it's not as good as the others. And they're constantly trying to ape other people's. And their own tech tree produces some really interesting ideas, some really interesting designs. The Type 14 is a bloomin' decent... This is it. This is the Type 14. It's a perfectly decent vessel. Admittedly, it has their cannon on top, and that's not a decent one. And yeah, you could... But you could have scaled that up and produced something very, very good. But they don't. They keep trying to jump from idea to idea, copy this person, copy that person. Or produce their own version of this person, that person, i.e. their own Winnie the Pooh mugs. And it doesn't help. Alright, I will... Oh, good lord. Sorry. Sister. You all know what she likes to do sometimes. I'll be back in 2 minutes. What's trying to move out here? Pops. Okay. The reason I do understand the Japanese on this front, and I have an idea of what it's because of the person I'm dealing with outside my own office right now for the last couple of seconds. Took me a while to convince her not to do that. My sister is an engineer. And engineers, in my experience, are constitutionally incapable, if they're good engineers, of doing anything less than the best they can to produce the most perfect scientifically engineering result. In this case, my sister has spent the last day wondering whether the pots we have moved from the front garden, which have roses into the back garden for the winter, so we can wrap them up and protect them, were in the right order. I have reorganised them 3 times. She was coming out and was looking at them going, well, should we move the pots around again? No. They're fine. In the order they are, go away. They are fine. The smaller pots are at the front, so we can easily reach those. The larger pots are at the back, so we can reach those over the smaller pots. It makes sense. But she wants to constantly make it. This is one of the reasons why, again, the chair moves around, all those things. Because she wants to make everything as good as it possibly can be and keeps thinking through the different permutations. While the historian in the house is just going, please, stop. It works, it's fine, it's good enough. Let's call it tradition and leave it be. That's the whole point of calling things tradition. Once it's a tradition, you leave them be. And I do agree that perfection is the enemy of good enough, and that is honestly something which I see in all of these programs, because when I look at the Italian mass boats are all about, they are great and they are good enough for what we need to do. Okay, that's why they keep building them after World War I. They keep improving on their existing design, because it's good enough. I would say the round boat, the reason they are so useful and special in case in comparison to the Schnell boats is because they are good enough and they will do pretty much anything that's needed on the round boat scale. I would say a lot of the evidence of Vosper versus Fairmile is Fairmiles are good enough. Let's be honest. There is nothing perfect about the Fairmile D, the dogboat, but it is great. It's not the fastest. It's not the best in really any category other than its ability to take the absurdly heavy gun loads for its size, and yet it's still great. And so, this is the trouble. The Japanese, the Americans are seeking perfection. Thank you, Jack Ray, for memberships. I am... let's put it this way. I've got the Japanese in the middle. Because, well, honestly, the Japanese boats do interest me, but also because the Soviet boats... Okay. So, with all that, there is no point with me going in through the Japanese boats without me talking about the Shinyo boats. And yes, this is spelt correctly. Now, these are... how do I put this part? Part of the whole range of Special Attack Units program. And you have the Kamikaze, the aircraft, the Kaiten, the submarines, the Fukuryu, suicide bombers, suicide divers and human mines, they're called, and the Shinyo, suicide boats. I have to say, I do find it interesting because you've got a Type 1, which is a single-person crew, and a Type 5, which is a two-person crew. And realistically, the Type 5 carries the heavier weapon, carries the heavier weapons. The Type 1 just carries explosives. The idea was that the explosives could be detonated by either impact or from a manual switch in the driver's area. So the boat could be aimed at the target and they could actually dive out. In fact, they were to an extent not even actually suicide boats, despite being officially suicide, part of the suicide, the special attack squadrons and the special attack units, because you can jump out of them. The Japanese army produced their own equivalent, the Maroni. Why did the Japanese army need to produce their own, and the Japanese Navy produce their own? I have no idea, but this is the IJN and the IJA. If in doubt, then they can have two competing programs, which will be competing for the same resources, and will cause competition and disruption and minimize their effort. They're going to do it. Here is the thing. Before anyone pops in and goes, well, Japanese mass production. The Japanese managed to build 6,197 at least Shinyobots and over 3,000 Maroni for the IJA. There were roughly 400 in Okinawa and Formosa. 400. Possibly more. But still, you're talking probably the best part of 8,000 boats are sitting waiting for the Allies in the Japanese home islands. So, let's talk about how successful they were. Well, very quickly, the Allies had developed the same approach to killing deeds as most of NATO has developed to killing and dealing with, missiles, etc. It's better to take out the launcher than it is to take out the boat. Let's go attack them in their harbour before they even manage to launch. The moment they're at sea, heading towards you and crew, that's when they're at the most dangerous. If they're all grouped together, being hidden in a cave, etc., blow up the cave. And as people keep saying, they are interesting. The fact is, the idea was, for some of them, was to, in the case of the Maroni, they were designed to drop two depth charges and then turn around before the explosion took place. The Navy ones could carry 300 kilograms of explosives in the bow. And if you think about it, 300 kilograms of explosive going off, that's going to have an effect on your ship. That's going to have an impact, quite literally. Now, this isn't an armor-piercing shell. It might not even pierce the hull, but let's put it this way. Consider these boats things that are going to distract things like your destroyers and your pickets. If you mount the whole force, and if the Japanese had actually achieved coordination, so they could have kamikazes coming in at the same time as suicide boats, and they probably would have achieved this in the home islands, where you would have had far better commander control and coordination going on. And maybe combined with a conventional attack as well going on at the same point, that can cause a lot of trouble for your invasion forces. Now, their top speed for the Type 1 was 26 knots, for the Type 5 was 30 knots. There is a debate as to what they were powered by, but basically it's a simple petrol engine. Basically. And as Dan Truman has pointed out, I want dog boats with 6-pounders. Pretty much that was the British idea. The British idea was, we bring the dog boats. The IJ and IJN rival comes from the Imperial Court, where you have 2 rival house lines. Ideas being both houses work to be better than the other. Mm-hmm. The USN had a really interesting anti-suicide boat production. Lines of MTD, then LCIG, then DDs, and group covering up the Shinano bases. That's pretty much what I just talked about. What they developed for Okinawa, and what was done by the British off the coast of Normandy at D-Day. One of the interesting things is there are a lot of sources, and I can understand where you're coming from, Trent. And even there are sources in the actual files which keep talking about them almost reinventing the wheel on how they're running these security, and then you look at the security that's implemented in Sicily and the security that's improved, and basically, yes, it's improved, but it's the same methodology of small boats backed up by larger boats to secure the area, and that's small boats backed up by larger boats backed up by ships to secure each of the sort of the beach edges against enemy small boat attacks. Now, I didn't forget the Suicide Frogmen. I talked about the Suicide Frogmen. They're the Fukuryu. So I mentioned them. The Suicide Divers, human minds. And they could also carry those, but, you know. Night Sailor everyone, I have no idea what the question is, because you just give me what happens to Shinano. I know what happens to Shinano, but you phrase that as a question as, let me know what you think about this. I think it's a loss of life, but I also think it's a war zone, and I think something happened. But that tends to happen in war zones. Actually, so I can seriously see the trials being really good at protecting beachheads against these, but it might mean that we give more casualty to those ships. Don't worry, Leslie. But the thing is, yes, I see tribals, but also battle class. Let's be honest, there's a reason the battle class are coming, and that is the reason the battle class are being rapidly deployed to the British Pacific Fleet. That's what the British are building for. The British are building these ships to deploy to the British Pacific Fleet for that reason. So these ships are all a factor. Okinawa is a factor. There is a reason the Royal Navy is A, assisting, but also B, compiling their own reports on Okinawa. It's not for the good of their health or because they like writing reports. Honestly, naval officers do not. I think that's one of the universal things about naval officers. They really don't like writing reports. It's because they're looking at these things and looking at the Japanese boats and they're going, what's going to be coming at us? I would also add that the overwhelming majority of the Japanese torpedo boats and conventional motorboats are in Japan at this point. And so these would also be a factor. And I could very much see these, things like the Type 14s, etc., going in alongside these, providing cover. And that could cause you real problems. It's phrased accurately. It's, I would say myself, it seems to me rather heavy on the commas and ands. Let's put it this way: if I was doing short form writing, which obviously is the question for a live chat, yes, that's fine. But if I was writing it as an actual paragraph or a couple of paragraph, yeah, I'd break it up into more sentences and give it slightly more detail to round it out a bit. If the war went along, the Soviets better be careful about deploying any ship named Kamchatka. We're getting to the Soviets. We're now at the Soviets. Okay. So, the Japanese, the US Navy took a little over an hour. The Japanese took a little over 40 minutes. The Soviets. Okay, I need more iron brew before I even get into this. Okay. Okay, fresh bottle it is. Do I have any food left? I have no food left. This is disturbing. I've managed to get through all my snacks. Oh. I will say that's one thing I've noticed with actually, with not having, and I know this is off topic, but I'm filling an iron brew at this point, so I'm not going to be discussing the topic really. One thing I have noticed with the current job scenario I'm in, where the normal role I have, which is a really weird story, because they actually gave me asked me to sign my contract, sign a contract early. Normally, universities make you sign a contract in October. You sign the contracts in October; they last you through till pretty much July. And then you're off contract for August and September. Well, that's fine. That's how it normally works. This year, come at the university that I normally do my most hours for a week. Conversely, also the lowest paid one, but the most hours I do a week, so it's lowest paid per hour, but it's the most hours, so it works out. Decided that after I'd submitted my pay slips for August, because they actually kept me employed through August and September and May, asked me to sign my contract early, they rejected those slips. And so I'm currently not working for them until we sort out whether they, well, honestly, I'm hoping for to get another job elsewhere, but that does mean I'm applying for contract posts in October and September, when normally you apply for them in August and July, to start in September, to start in October, which is fun. Anyway, because I don't have those hours in my week, and that was about 24 hours in the middle of Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, over 8 hours each day, I've been spending more time doing recording. And my snack consumption has gone up massively. I mean, literally, I am snacking far more doing recording videos than I was ever sitting there doing the tutoring. So, let's start off with the oldest torpedo boat that probably served for the Soviets. And please note I'm saying probably the one, because there are rumours that some of these coastal motorboats actually ended up doing some duty for the Soviets in World War II. Ay, caramba. Let's answer the question before I get in them. Battle class, have you heard of our Lord and Savior in the 405, Cal? Yeah, it's fun. Right then. So, this A-class vessel. Well, this isn't the A-class vessel. This is actually a bigger one, because this is the A68, which is from a later, slightly larger variant of the A's, torpedo boats, which were built by the Germans to serve their fleet in World War I. A32 was actually sunk in 1917. Yeah. During Operation Albion, which was their amphibious victory against the Russians. It was a brilliant plan, but they lost it. And then in 1923, it was raised and repaired by the Estonians to join their navy as the Silev, which tells you exactly how much funding the Estonian navy was getting. That to get a torpedo boat, they were raising it from being sunk instead of ordering it from someone. Now, this gets even better, because in October 1940, when Estonia falls to the Russian invasion, I always loved the way the Russian invasions in 1940 are forgotten completely compared to the, German invasions in 1939, but that's because of the reality of wars. The enemy of my enemy is my friend and all that stuff. And so it gets renamed the Amethyst, or the Amacon, and serves in the Soviet Navy as a patrol vessel until it's scrapped in 1950. And actually does fight the Germans. So at some point, there was an actual fight between a German Schnellboot, most likely, because of where it is positioned. I know I said usually most likely it's a Rombot, but this was actually possibly a Schnellboot, and a German World War I torpedo boat. Think about that. Think about the Schnellboot coming up going, I'm going to fight you. Grandpa? Was it going, yeah, Grandma? Yeah, that's my great aunt. I can't shoot that. Neither managed to sink each other, so, it was all fine. But it's practically causing familial fighting. I'd also like to point out this is the boat which I am most comfortable talking about, because what comes next? Holy I think at best we can describe as intriguing. Okay? The policies which come after this are intriguing. So, okay. Right, everyone, meet the SH-4. Yes, that is a whaleback. Yes! Do you know what they called launching a torpedo? Having a baby. Why? Because they were birthed out of the cradle at the back. You have it. The Soviets were going for the launch the torpedoes from the stern behind us, then turn away and scenario of torpedo boat firing. Yeah. Okay. I would love to say that the Soviets don't double down on us, but literally they call the method of holding the torpedoes, of course, called the cradle. So that's why they're cradled, and when they leave the stern of the boat, that's berthing it. And then they actually do refer to the torpedoes at points, it seems, as babies. So, yeah. Digest that for a second. That was an interesting thing to read. That was a really interesting thing to read. Now, I want to go a little bit further. I want to discuss a little bit more about this class, because basically the SH-4 has, such an interesting career. There is a debate as to whether they are 1925, 1928. They're pretty much the Soviet Navy's a constant fun. And I want to say this now. You're going to notice that the names in front of the SH and the designations in front of numbers keep changing. There is a reason for this, and numbers change as well, because the Soviets do not have a rhyming or reasoning behind their naming of things. Before someone goes, yes, they're named for the design establishment and all these things, you can say that. But then you look at the boat, and you know it was a collaboration between 2 or more design houses. And you know from the design and shaping of the boat, which house probably had more work involved in it and develops it more. But that's not necessarily the design house that gets its name on the boat. But guess what? The design house that wins and gets its name on the boat might not be the one which picks the number. So the number might come from the design house which doesn't get a name on the boat series. And the name of the boat comes from the design house which doesn't get a number on it. It's designed to drive anyone who's trying to figure it out and put it into a logical order because of their naming truly round the twist. But this is not my biggest problem with these boats. No, I have many problems with these boats. Not only is the launching of the torpedoes a particularly interesting thing, and by the way, yes, before anyone comes up and goes, coastal motorboats, most boats use it, especially the small ones. They did. The British used it. There is a very interesting gentleman of the Royal Navy, who I cannot find a book now, who actually gets to be a... Where is it? Where is that book? Oh, good Lord. I can remember the title of the book. It's Churchill's Admiral in 2 Wars. Is that it there? No, that's not it there. I'm looking for the actual book. Nope, cannot see it for the life of me. Cannot see it for the life of me. This is annoying. But anyway. He actually won a VC using that methodology. And that's, of course, Admiral Lord Keyes. I wouldn't ask my sister to organise my library. Whilst in the nicest way, my library is fairly organised, and I do tend to have the stuff quite visible. But the thing is, I've worked through 4 different videos and 5 written projects today, including submissions for a conference, which I have no idea if I will have the money to attend. Please note that wasn't a request for funding. That's literally a typical academic response. I applied for a conference, and I have no idea if I will have the money to attend it, because part of the application is also for funding. And they could let you into the conference but deny you funding. That's happened in the past. So the thing is, because of that, I have moved piles of books around quite a lot today. So yeah. Anyway. So, I'm going to give you some stats for this, but they come from the SH4 of 1928, which is a slightly different version than the SH4 of 1925. How do I know this? Because the SH4 in 1925 has 10.8 tons standard in displacement. But the model which is produced in 1928 is 10.9 tons in standard. Yet people tell me it's the same design, and I go, but it's put on weight, specifically 100 kilograms. Now, if I put on 100 kilograms, I would not be the same Alex. I would be a far larger Alex. I would be large enough, I would probably squash Dan and Gareth and Drac when we were on a plane. So, this boat changes. Not only that, they have issues with maintenance, poor training, lack of equipment, and all sorts of things. But more importantly than that, they suffer issues because someone had many bright ideas when building them. Many, many bright ideas. And their bright idea was, let's make a boat that can do 49 knots in rough sea, which is why it has the whaleback. And also why, look at those crew. There is a reason why the literal bridge looks like a conning tower. In fact, it is a conning tower, let's be honest, because quite often it's going to be underwater. Now, that's what I said, the boat is clearly made for Arctic conditions, and I am sure, agree it is. That's why it's in the whaleback form. But the trouble is, it's made for Arctic conditions, and it's then deployed in the Black Sea. The Baltic I can understand. The North Sea I can, the North Atlantic, Arctic I can understand. It needs speeders, but it is deployed in the Black Sea. It's also the first vessels they design and try and use something called alumin on. Now, alumin is an aluminium and copper alloy, and I'll be getting to that in a second. But they didn't realize when they built it that there were going to be problems. And oh my, are there problems. This is basically a maintenance nightmare. It's... How can a motorboat even come? I mean, there isn't a lot of water for fuel to carry. Well, let's put it this way. The official standard displacement was 10.9 tons for the 1928 version, and fully loaded it was 12.8 tons. So officially, it puts on 1.9 tons of water and fuel. No idea. It was powered by 2 Wright Typhoon engines. That's Wright as in WRIGHT. Yes, they are American. They are gasoline. By 1928, its top speed has dropped down from 49 knots to 44 knots. And it carries 2 18-inch torpedoes and a single 0.3-inch machine gun, and has a crew of 6. Let's remember, is that a battery in salt water? Well, aluminium and copper. Now, you might have noticed that I said these weren't really maintained very well, and by the end of the 1930s, they're pretty much all worn out. So, the 36 of these vessels which were built weren't really in active service in World War II, and retired due to low seaworthiness, despite the whaleback hull design, and despite due to small endurance, and they had a habit of torpedoing each other when they launched their torpedoes. It was found you need to have very, very precise doctrine and explanation to crews of where you veered off to and where you were going to go when you launched your torpedoes. Where were they built and based? Well, this is an interesting problem again for the Soviets. They were built all over the place, and they were very much based everywhere. They did try and base them in the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Pacific. By the end, I know I said there's 36 built, there's 55 theoretically commissioned. But there seems to be differing figures of how many were built versus how many were commissioned, which suggests that some were commissioned multiple times. Or alternatively, there are another factors in the yards building them. But it's a stepped whaleback hull, and as said, it's duralumin. And I will get into that in a second, because duralumin is something which is fun. Oh, good lord. So, basically, the SH4 is not a good idea. So let's double down on it and build the G5. If you're sitting there and going, Alex, but hang on, it's called 5, but it's called G rather than SH. Yeah. So, let me put this politely. there is a sub-design house for which this is design number 4 and this is design number 5. That was design number 3, but it took a long time to get a service. And the thing is, they are not as politically influential as the major houses, and basically they pick in. Now, Duramin, and sometimes called Duramillion or various other things, is basically a trade name for one of the earliest, if not the earliest, of aluminium copper alloy. Okay, all those thinking, hang on, you've complained about aluminium in water before. Doesn't aluminium and any other metal produce galvanic action, galvanic corrosion, which basically means there's an electronic corrosion going on, which is destroying the boat? Yeah. Andy, they are in War Thunder, and they are great fun. They are. Now, Duramin was developed by a German gentleman, it's by Alfred Wilm, in 1903. He discovered that after quenching, the aluminium alloy contained 4% copper, and that would harden when left at room temperature for several days. They managed to make it better and better. And by 1999, it's really good. And for example, the main materials in Duramin, other than aluminium, are copper, manganese, and magnesium. And so this became something which is really quite a useful material. And I will say this. Its developments are a lot of materials which are still used in aviation to this day. It's a very, very popular in aviation. However, for a torpedo boat, it's not good. And there is a reason I think that some of these are, I say they are 55 commissioned, but I'm not sure if it's just 36 built or if there actually are 55 built and we're not sure about it built. It's because you have to remember, the Soviets have a habit of recommissioning vessels when they have to come back from a factory. This is one of the problems with T-55 numbers, because the Soviets include in their numbers of T-55 produced the T-55s which are sent back to factories, basically rebuilt and sent out again. They are new T-55s. Well, it's the same with torpedo boats. When their hulls wear off and they practically sink. So, saying that, let's consider the G5s. As Carl knows, not just galvanic in seawater, it also burns. It is fun. It is, yeah. Yes, the summer Drac was laughing his head off when you were talking about. When I mentioned, nicest way, when this has been discussed at various points, my dear colleague and I have had a interesting time. Let's put it this way: if we are having a slow day, we just consider some of the designers behind this. Now, let me put it this way: we know a gentleman who possibly was a boat commander, but was at least an officer probably aboard one of these boats, when captured by the Germans, said that in the summer, basically every 5 to 7 days, they have to be taken out of the water and specially cleaned and prepared to prevent corrosion. Think about that. Every week you have to take your torpedo boat out of the water to clean it, scrape it, paint it. Every week. Or it could go every 10 to 14 days in wintertime. Roughly. roughly. There are some slightly different figures given at various points. I think the other figure that's given is that it was 5 to 7 days, 10 to 15 days. So, yeah. Imagine that. You have a torpedo boat made of aluminium, and you need to take it out. And instead of going, well, what about sacrificial anodes? Because let's think about it. Sacrificial anodes have been around for a long time. They're otherwise known as galvanic anodes. And, well, these blocks of zinc have been around for a little over 100 years. In fact, possibly longer than that, I think. Depends on who you're talking to, but yeah. I seem to remember. I'm sure they're older than that 100 years. Where's the idea? Oh, the zinc ones have been around for 100 years, so they're probably old ones, which are other materials which were before that. Yeah. So the point is, sacrificial anodes exist. They could have put sacrificial anodes on them. They didn't. I have no idea why, but I do have a reason in my head, because if you'd put them on, you'd have had to admit that having your aircraft designers involved in your torpedo boat production and using aircraft materials to produce torpedo boats was not exactly smart. Because at some point you have to admit the Soviet Union made a boo-boo, and that is something you can't do in a dictatorship. Now, once again, those of you who are sharp-eyed have noticed that the baby birthing methodology of launching torpedoes has continued. There are various other Soviet expressions for it. I should say that there are others who do not use that phraseology and use other phraseologies. But yes, the torpedoes are in the cradle, and they are birthed from the stern. And I have to admit, that was the other problem. They found when they did more their very nice motor torpedo boats next to things like their own cruisers, they have a habit of turning them into the sacrificial anodes for the cruisers. Excellent. So in my time in this channel, you've shown me planes made out of battleship plate steel and boats made out of aircraft steel. I worry for humanity. Yeah. Welcome to my world. You're on. Sorry if this was said, but we're claiming the alloy was corrosion-proof because anodes have been used on metal hulls for a while by now. That's the interesting thing, Runon. They were trying to market that they had conquered it. They had conquered corrosion. They made it no longer necessary. There were all sorts of various propaganda stuff produced around the G5. And, yeah. But my main problem is that they chose aluminium in the first place. They had already had the SH4s, which had rusted to nothing. And before you start to think, I haven't even gone back to some of the earlier torpedo boats they had. The Soviets were very keen on torpedo boats. They started investigating them in 1921. They worked on all sorts of experimental vessels. And so they did develop these things. They did work through them. They were good boats. Many of them. Good boats. But there is one out there which is called the Ant, produced by, again, Tuplov. And AN Tuplov is pretty much the aircraft designer who keeps getting involved in motor torpedo boats. Basically, Tuplov appears in all sorts of places for Russian and Soviet design. He's one of their few decent engineers. But he is obsessed with aluminium and using aluminium on everything. And yeah, this is the Soviet LCS. Yeah, there's a discussion on the aircraft made out of battleship steel. I forget, but I think it wasn't the whole aircraft from memory. Oh, what type of aircraft was it? In that it had its core frame made from battleship grade steel, and it's basically ship steel, and then it had the rest of its hull made, frame made of more steel. So it might well have been a MiG-25, but I cannot remember for the life of me around. So, right then, let's talk some more about the G5s, because they weigh in at officially 16 1/3 tons standard. They are 61 foot 10 inches to 62 foot 8 inches. And please note, I'm giving you stats for the Series 10. Why am I giving you the stats for the Series 10? Well, the G5s have the Series 7, the Series 8, Series 9, the Series 10, and Series 11. And here is the thing. There are 152 boats built to the Series 7, 8, and 9 standards in between 1934 and 1936. And then from 1937, they build the Series 10 standards, where they build roughly, up until 1940, they managed to produce 101, roughly. And then the remainder of the boats produced are the Series 11. So in the nicest way, when I give you the stats for the Series 10, I'm giving you the stats for the group which made up over a third of the vessels. And the remaining ones roughly comprise roughly 50 boats each. It was the engines light signal. Ah, cute. What was the frame? It's on the framing as well. Oh, that was steel. I'll look up later. Anyway, so the Series 7 weighed in at 14 tons standard, and they just had a single 7.6mm, 6.2mm machine gun, and occasionally got a 12.7mm machine gun as an addition. And you notice the two machine gun positions. There's the one here on the back of the... I'm going to call it conning tower, not a bridge, because let's be honest, it is a conning tower. And there's the one which is the forward position. And then you've got the torpedo launchers. The 7 series were basically the same as the 8 series were basically the same as 7, apart from they only had a single 12.7mm machine gun, rather than having the 7.62. The Series 9 were enlarged, and when I say enlarged, they'd gone up by 720 kilograms at standard load. And their overall, but please note, this is what I find funny, is their overall length actually ranges, because the Series 9, some of them are 18.85 meters, and some of them are 19.08 meters. So if you think about that, that's a variance of 23 centimeters. Think about that again. You're talking about a boat which is less than 20 meters long, and there is a variance in their construction result of 23 centimeters. Less than 20 meters, variance of 23 centimeters. Now, you might be sitting there going, well, Alex, that's only a little over 1%. Yeah. But 23 centimeters is large enough you can pick it up by eye. Especially when it's less than 20 meters long and they're going to be next to each other. Then you have the Series 10. As said, they're 16.26 tons. So they have managed to go up by roughly 2.23 tons over the original vessels, the Series 7s, which is quite a significant weight increase. They use the GAM-34BS engines. The GAM-34BS engines. Please note, I am not saying what I think that stands for, but you can agree with it if you want to. And they had 850 brake horsepower engines, and so they had those. And their top speed of the Series 10 was 53 knots. Again, I'm sure you're all sitting there going, but would I want to be doing 53 knots in this? And I would go, well, you might as well, because you can enjoy what is basically a low-flying aircraft, because that's what it's designed as. Then you have the Series 11, which have got the 1,000 brake horsepower GAM-34 BSF engines. Top speed 56 knots. And they get 2 of the 12.7mm machine guns, along with their torpedoes. So, there you go. The G5s. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Baltic Fleet had 60 G5s and so the Black Sea Fleet had 92, and the Pacific Fleet had 135, and plus there were 6 sitting in the Caspian Fleet. During World War II, as said, 73 are lost in action. A further 31 were scrapped after becoming unserviceable. So that means roughly, 104 lost that way. By the end of the war in 1945, 24 were in service and with the Baltic Fleet, 134 were with the Pacific Fleet, and 6 were still the Caspian Flotilla. What's interesting to note is the Pacific Fleet ones are there because of the Soviet fear of Japan. Then they do take part in operations for that, but they were there for Japan. Basically, the idea was these were there if the Japanese attacked them, they couldn't Vladivostok them again because they'd sent out a horde of G5s into the Pacific, charging. They would all berth their torpedoes, probably turn off, smash into someone else's torpedoes, and then not sink the Japanese. Actually, no, of course they would turn them off correctly. But yeah, are the boats from the father of the arachnoplane? Yes, the arachnoplane engineer who's ends up pushing that is involved in their original construction. Well, in points in their construction, I think. Now, let me put this nicely. What do they actually get used for in World War II? Not a lot of it is torpedoing vessels. They do sink the Finnish mine layer, the Relanti, and they were known to take on the M37, a German minesweeper. They, I think, managed to damage... No, these weren't ones which damaged the German destroyer. That's the later ones which damaged the third 34. during the Crimean offensive, the 3G5s managed to cripple the UJ-104 near Sevastopol, a German sub-hunter. And while doing that, the Sublocontento Gelescu, excuse me, the Romanian gunboat, pardon me, managed to open fire and, using tracer rounds, located them, fired them, and this enabled the other vessels around, other ships, to actually spot the three boats and start firing, and that sank one of the G5s. Don't worry, the G5s got their revenge, because later they managed to sink the damaged and abandoned Romanian mine layer, the Romania. Now, also, please note, the Soviet Union do like to transfer these boats around, and a lot of navies get them, including North Korea and the Spanish Republican Navy. So I like to give these things all things. Thank you, Paul Horishkayo. These boats have an interesting war, but I would say they're not, considering their armament fit and their whaleback design, which means they're not really good for adding more armament, because if you think about that, if your boat is regularly swept with water, it's not really something you can start adding more guns on top of and more weapons. They spend most of World War II being used for landing troops. Again, what they would do is they put the soldiers either on a boat, but sometimes not on a boat, where the torpedoes go, for transporting high-value personnel between special sites, for escorting landing craft and other vessels in, and were basically spent most of World War II being very useful assets, not doing torpedo running, which is probably a good thing for them, because, let's be honest, I do not want to be launching those torpedoes. But ultimately, yeah, they did have better. And now we have the D3. Okay. So, please note, this is the point at which I'd really like to tell you that sanity broke out, and the Soviet Union, because I'm fairly certain what starts this is Stalin notices that the Germans and Hitler has the Schnellboot or sort of boot or something like that, or the rowboat, because that's the only reason I can see them suddenly having some version of sanity coming up. But here's the thing. Here is the really great thing about the D3. Starts off with a program where they try to build a motor torpedo boat, which, remember, has to be light and has to ride the waves with its lightness and its form. And they build it. They test two models. One they make of wood, and the other one they make of steel. Okay, it could be worse, it could be aluminium, but they seriously... Ay, caramba. So, they build two designs, and in 1935 they start working on it. The idea was they wanted a larger motor torpedo boat that would possess higher endurance and higher capacity for armament than the G5s. Well, In 1937, they finally issued specifications. Well, hey. And 2 designs, as said, are created. There is the D2 and the SM3. Now, they have other names that they are referred to. Occasionally, they are referred to as the Project 200. And they are part of the various variants of the various projects which come from it. Now, officially, the steel variant, well, the Subchaser variant, is cancelled due to lack of available steel. Yay! But there could be another reason why it's cancelled. Because they send the D3, the D2, and the SM3. Sorry, it's under the D3 notes, but it's the D2 at that point. They send them to testing. Remember, the SM3 is the steel one. Its hull cracked at high speeds. Literally. It was going so fast, it cracked itself. That's probably due to the level of flex which can go into a steel hull versus a wooden hull. Don't worry though, because the D2, the wooden one, had such poor stability that the Soviet Union decided to put neither into production. At this point, you're probably expecting me to say that what happened to those boats were they were quietly discarded, or they were burnt, or someone had a funeral pyre with them, or their parts were reused for something else. But no, they weren't. Both were commissioned into the Black Sea Fleet. So, you literally have one which cracked itself and its hull at high speed, and the other one which has such poor stability no one wants to stay on it, and yet they still commission them into service. Because they don't want to lose face. Anyway, they were that bad. They were that bad, Leslie. So, what happens was someone starts working in pretty much one of the yards and goes, we can actually fix this. And so they take the D2 and they start working on it. The thing is, they create the D3. And the prototype itself for the D3 is completed in 1939. But guess what? You'd think, hang on. Considering what happened with the D2 and the SM3, I'm doing nothing till we test this prototype. I am going to wait. I am going to test it. I am going to be sure. I am going to actually put effort into quality control and standardization. I am going to do this, and I'm going to do this proud. No. They order them. They actually order production before the prototype has even gone through trials. They order production before the prototype has even launched. Now, this point, they have an even more fun, because those original prototype and the original production run are all designed around the Michelin GAM 34 FN engines. 3 of them, driving 3 shafts. But here is a joyous thing, because this tells you how bad that engine was. Because, let's be honest, boats cracking their own hulls didn't stop them from being commissioned in the Soviet Navy. But the Michelin GAM 34 FN is so unreliable. It's so bad that even in the Soviet Union, they are forced to discontinue its construction in 1940. And so, they equipped them instead with the GAM 34 BS engines. Because they have lower power, they reduce the top speed of the D3 from 48 knots to 32. Think about how bad an engine has to be in the Soviet Union for it to be discontinued. This is an engine which, by the way, the 34 FN, the AM34, they produced 10,000 versions of the 34. The FN variant was supposed to be a really big improvement. It was supposed to be it was supposed to basically take the GAM 34F, add in what was called the FN25 geared centrifugal supercharger, and a single K4 carburetor, and using the oil system from the GAM 34 BS. And it was only in production from August 1939 to, I think from the stats, June 1940. So think about that. This engine, even prior to World War II, is in production for August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. 11 months. Maybe 10. And yes, you can possibly catch them with Ira Renown. They displaced 31 tons. The engines I'm just going to move on from before I get depressed. They displaced 31 tons in standard. They were roughly 73 foot 6 inches in overall length. They're 13 foot 3 inches, that's 4 meters in beam. They had a really fun with engines, of all their petrol engines. They had a crew of 9, and they'd be armed with either 12.7mm machine guns, or later, when the crews could, get hold of them, a 20mm Oerlikon, or a 25mm gun, or anything they could get hold of, and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes, and 4 depth charges. Please note, before you start thinking that they were innately sensible, they did produce 24 of the steel torpedo boat. They did actually try and take the the D3 design, turn it into an SM3 design, and build 24 of them. It used M50 diesel engines and to use torpedo tubes rather than a cradle system, or in this case, a side cradle system. But yeah, it was terrible. Okay? Now, here is the big problem for these vessels, because they spend a lot of their time in the Baltic Sea. That's where the majority of them are. And they spend a lot of time fighting the Finnish Navy. In this Battle of War, though, in the Baltic, they did manage to sink a Elbing-class torpedo boat, but it's the German kind of torpedo boat, so it's how do I put this? It's the not quite destroyer, kind of the equivalent of the Otari and the Chidori class, etc. of the Japanese, the Elbing class, and it was T-31. They did manage to sink that. The Black Sea didn't see a lot of these boats, although SM3, the steel vessel, and D3 were active and did take part in various operations, disturbingly enough for the poor crew. In the Arctic, a D3 class vessel was decorated twice under the command of Alexander Shablin as a hero of the Soviet Union. And I think that could be this vessel, which is put on display in Severance. Yes, this is that's the vessel. That's why I have that in my notes, because that is the vessel which is on the display on memorial in Severance. They do not have a good career. None of these ships have a good career. But as you can see, the whole thing I've been saying the whole over it is that 28 were lost out of 73. Yeah. I would love to say they were lost because they were used so much, but they were used because there was nothing else available. And one of the things that worries me about a loss is the sheer quality, the time it does take, and the fact that some of the vessels did actually try to operate with those original engines. And because that would have given them, in theoretically, 40 knots. So there are issues. There are issues with these vessels. Look, I'm fairly certain, Dan, that the commanders of the SM3 and the D2 and the original D3 prototype, I'm fairly sure the officers put in charge of those boats were ones who the admirals really didn't like. Decision 90, they're pretty terrible in War Thunder 2. I'm not surprised, because if you model them in any way accurately, they're not going to be. Have you noticed a small problem here, though? They need gunboats. They keep wanting to try and add guns onto these, but none of their torpedo boats are designed with the ability to be modified. Well, things are about to get worse, because... Okay. I'm going to say this in the live, but I didn't really do this in the recorded video, because frankly I wasn't going to do specifically this, but I'm going to do it here. I'm going to go to the MTBs Europe, and I'm going to get something out. And there's the Vosper. 73-footer, right? And I'm going to add another image. And that is the Vosper 70-footer. Anyone noticing any similarities going on at all? Because, again, I'm not going to claim this is designed by Britain or is based on stolen designs, etc., stolen designs or anything like that. At all, I'm not going to claim that. But I have a feeling that this is at least an homage. That at least someone has looked at the Vospers and gone, you know what? Those guys are nuts. They literally produce a torpedo boat for everyone in every possible size. But, you know, perhaps they're onto something. Now, this is otherwise known as the Project 123 bis, or K class, the Cosmolet class, or the P4 class torpedo boat. What can I say about them? Well, never let the Soviet Union let you doubt that they can carry on with aluminium, because they can. They can. You see, if we consider the Vosper boats, what material was the Vosper torpedo boats produced from? You know, they are good ships. They are very good vessels. And they are a lovely shape. They really are. But, in saying that, and discussing this, there is a small issue in all these designs. When you're taking a design which is shaped and aimed for one material, and you adapt it to shape it for another material, you're going to introduce some changes. Vospers were not designed for aluminium. I think they were wooden, but I'm not 100% sure on what wood system they used. These ones were continuation of their, well, actually not aluminium, Durlum, aluminium copper alloy hulls. Again, they required a lot of maintenance, but they could come in two variants. And eventually they could come with even 14.5mm machine guns and radar. That surviving version is one which served for the Bangladeshi in the Bangladeshi Navy. But these vessels have a single-step hydroplaning design. Their prototypes built in Leningrad by Marty Yard, on number 194, in 1939. It had a flush deck hull, which meant you could mount more weapons to it. And more importantly, they were powered by American-supplied Packard petrol engines instead of the GAM-34 Michelin engines. These vessels were really, really good. Post-World War II, they start putting in M50 diesel engines because the Americans stopped sending them the Packard engines for some reason. Can't think why post-World War II the Americans stopped doing that. But they had already experienced quite a good service history because it's the vessels in the Baltic Fleet in 1944 that managed to attack the Z-34, the Stora 34, the German destroyer, and whilst they're unable to sink it, they do score hits on it. And that's... TK-131 and 141. I'm sure it is, because that's what's written in my notes. But for some reason my brain wanted to say 121. But again, you have to remember the numbering system. The Soviets and a lot of others do numbering, which it confuses the numbers of how many vessels they have. I'm sure it's 131 and 141. That's what is in my notes. That is what is in my notes. Stop second-guessing your notes, Alex. Now, these vessels go on to fight for all sorts of other people. In fact, the People's Republic of China have 46 of them that they assigned to 4 torpedo boat brigades in 1951. They purchase a further 90 over the next few years. And they spend a lot of their time fighting in the Straits of Taiwan. In fact, it's in 1954, 4 of them sink the Evetts-class frigate, the ex-USS Decker, the Taiping. And it's from China that Bangladesh's P4s come from, because the P4s were past them. So one of the things is, if you do maintain and are prepared to do all the corrosion treatment and protection on these boats, you can keep the aluminium hulls going very well. But it takes a lot of work. A lot of effort. So I don't want people to go away from it thinking aluminium boats are automatically bad. They aren't. They just require a lot of effort and a lot of work, and maybe don't make sense for torpedo boats in this period. But also, sacrificial anodes, or galvanic anodes, whatever you want to call them, attach them. Stop thinking you managed to cure something which you can't. We are not at that metallurgical, technological development yet that we can do that. And it's actually, I think it's some of the P4s sent to North Vietnam that starts the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But they are good vessels. For a price. And by the standards of the Soviet Union. There are a lot more of these built, and they could have a crew of 7 to 12. But it's also worth considering that these vessels, they are produced at the end of the war. And whilst, again, please note, it's approximately 336 completed because no one's quite sure. Whilst they could have been very useful, think about the point at which the Soviets are fighting a war for many years. They are fighting in the Baltic, Black Sea. These are all literal waters. And these had started to be designed in 1939-ish. They started working on them. But it's 1942 they really start kicking up the program that leads to these ones, because they want to replace the G5s. You think about how important those seas, those waters are, and this is what you end up replacing the G5s with, but it takes you how long into a war to get round to it? And how long to push it through? And how long to build it? When, frankly, these things should have been very useful for them and should have been in service. And let's be honest, this would have been far more useful in service than a G5. Because if I can show you the next picture, once you look at that foredeck, yeah, they've still got a bit of a flush foredeck, but you could actually put a gun there. You could actually put something there. You can actually turn these into useful gunboats. And yes, they were also used in the Turkish Cypriot War, though I've only got notes they used, I haven't got notes about what they were. Like Miles Range, they have a nice little expedition about coastal motorboats and naval fireboats using the Gospel earlier summer. That's cool. These didn't sink themselves. They as with these vessels, the D3s, you'll notice that the torpedoes are no longer being berthed. At some point, someone actually does realise that maybe that's not the best idea. That there's a reason the British gave it up pretty much after World War I. Very quickly. And only ever use it on small boats even then. There is a reason. So, summary. Oh. Torpedo boats! Fun things. The thing is, these operating the waters you needed gunboats more than arguably than the European theatre. Arguably, you can make a better case for a gunboat fighting in the littorals against Japanese suicide boats than you can in the European theatre. Arguably, in fighting in the Baltic, fighting in the Black Sea, you can make a case for them. But in almost all cases, the adaptations are left to the crews. The government doesn't really push through any sort of proper gunboat. And in almost all cases, the navies have not really designed something for the war they find themselves fighting. They've designed them all for a theory of war which doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And that's their problem. These were all designed, in many ways, as giant killers. Let's be honest. There is no scenario where you want to be one or two boats launching an attack with torpedoes in that fashion. Although, frankly, it's far safer to be doing that if you've only got two boats, because you can launch and dive off in different directions away from the torpedoes. But if you think about that, you are literally plopping them, launching them, getting out of their way. These you're firing and then turning off behind them. Far safer from the perspective of everyone who's actually involved. But again, it's a case of what are these being designed for? They're being designed to kill giants. Torpedoes are weapons you use as a smaller ship to kill a larger ship. And that's what they're there for. But to kill each other, you need heavy machine guns. Honestly, you need, well, a decent 40mm probably will do. 57mm is lovely, but a decent 40mm will do. And you just... Where do you put them on this? You could probably mount it forward, but you're going to need to do some work to that design. Same with this one. That one, no. There is no way you can put a 40mm. Lord help you with that. That could take a 40mm. That couldn't. That would have to be scaled up. They could, but shouldn't. They should be carrying other things. They are carrying 40mm. That could probably have been adapted to it. That could be adapted to it. And that could be adapted to it. But you need effort, and you need to acknowledge it. As you were discussing gunboats, I thought you might have got onto the Soviet Bronkrata and its non-powered 76mm turret from a T-34. The trouble is, that's riverine gunboats, which again are used for that sort of role to an extent. But they come from a different design philosophy and a different design grouping. And the thing is, once I start including them, and this is the trouble, is once I start including some boats from some nations, I have to include other boats from other nations. And at a certain point, I found when I was doing one of the original versions of this, to be fair, I would be including the insect class as well for the Royal Navy. At which point it gets really interesting, but it just didn't make sense. So I cut them out. Right then, I'm gonna say final questions. I hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow's video should be the Neptune class. As were being designed by Admiral Cunningham. If anyone has good images for the Neptune class, please send them through to me that you're allowed to use, because so far the drawings I've got are not very good. I'm not sure why, but they aren't very good. Bolster, in all seriousness, how much did British torpedo operations get to USSR post-World War I have on the Soviet small boat doctrine? More than probably they should have done. I think Lord Keyes should probably have a statue of himself somewhere in the Soviet Union for actually inspiring their obsession with small boats. And actually, that's one of the reasons why they have them. But also, you know, nicest way, that's one of the reasons why they're developing them as early as 1925-24 back in the 1920s. It's because of that experience. But that also does leave them with that experience and those boats. There is something to be said for taking a break. The British take a break and come back with quite good boats in World War II after World War I. But then you've got the Americans who completely avoid their vessel, which was actually quite good. And you've got the Japanese. Alex, you said one of the first ones couldn't carry a 40mm. What about 2 to 4 spinal mount with maybe 10-degree traverse? Shouldn't be too difficult. So basically, you arm it like a fighter of the sea. Don't take this the wrong way, Melanie. Whilst that's a very interesting idea, and I'm sure it was half meant in jest, I'm also thinking of the sheer amount of saltwater effect on it, and also the fact that if you have, therefore, steel of the gun barrel steel that close to aluminium and copper alloy in regular saltwater effect, I have a feeling that's going to have a massive effect on your hull. So yeah, I would probably not go there. Do you think the torpedo boat only became viable in the missile era as a fast attack craft? No, the torpedo boat was viable in World War II, in World War I. They're viable because they are a threat. The thing is, if you expect something from them, and what do you expect from them? Do you expect them to be an actual going out and killing someone and being an offensive weapon, or do you expect them to be a defensive threat? I.e., you come into this area, there are going to be 20-odd, 30-odd, 40-odd torpedo boats on you. Think about that. If that's what you're dealing with, they're kind of scary, because you think about it, how many ships am I going to lose to these small things which the enemy can afford to reproduce as much as they can? And that's basically their point. At their point, they are a very cheap source of vessels to be put in places. Stephen Richard, yes, the American crews did upgun the PT boats, but the point is the British government actually produced torpedo gunboats. Whereas the American crews, the Soviet crews, the Japanese crew all upgunned the vessels themselves. The British government actually turned around and go, so you're upgunning your ships. Okay, we'll produce a dogboat. And then you can upgun it even more, because it starts off as a gunboat. And as Michael Couch points out, the small boats do make strategic sense for the early Soviets, as they focus in on coastal defense and, while trying to make their internal organization work. Nice everyone. That's not really a torpedo boat question, but I'll answer it. Why did the British Empire alt history seem to lack in much imagination? I'm not sure. I haven't read that many recently, but usually it's because they do not have much of the understanding of where the history and evolution and the planning of the British Empire was actually going. They either presume it was going to go as it went, or it was going to continue as it was, when in fact it was in the process of changing. Yeah, there are lots of articles around which say it's a good idea to bring it back. I wouldn't be surprised if something like it does get brought back, but probably in uncrewed form. I might look at the World War II era at some point, the post-World War II era. And the small little remote control boat sailing around the festival? Well, you know, at some point someone was bound to update the ideas for these. And let's be honest, that's not really that complicated in technological an idea. It's not a new idea, it's an idea which has been developed, and yeah, they're going to use them. It's I try to explain that sometime in quite a lot of history is that there are very few completely new ideas. Most of the stuff is contextually new, nuanced new, but not actually necessarily a new idea. There is new stuff. There are new roles, and often they are reframing of old roles. But there are new roles which are brought to us by technological and scientific advancement. You know, that's the old saying, isn't there? That 2/3 of the jobs in 30 years' time are not even understood today, or something like that. And that doesn't surprise me. But one of the things that also continues is that new things come in, new job titles, etc., but old jobs often remain. Right. So, I'm going to, because frankly I need to, go have a comfort break, and then I will be on Discord. Because I have drunk, obviously, roughly 4 litres of iron brew today, I think. Oh, that's because I'm out of snacks. I keep drinking instead of snacking. Alright, I'm just going to answer. Nice. Are the Dark class and Gay class fast patrol boats, or the Brave class fast attack craft, the successors to Torpedo boat? I wouldn't say necessarily the Gay class are, but they have some similarities to them. George Newman, yeah, I got home just in time, sorry. Or did you in Discord and ask questions like that? Manly Signet, do you happen to know the warhead size of the current day Sevastopol unidentified objects floating before boom? No, I don't off the top of my head. And most of the stuff I see going around is estimates. I wouldn't be surprised if they're constantly working on them. As Gildy has just pointed, there are two which officially are 400 kilogram and 800 kilogram. Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have something slightly more going around. Anyway, take care, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Frank. Thank you. I'm not speaking beaches. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, George. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, DJ40, Melanie640. Thank you, George Newman, Steve Clarke, Joss Fonk. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you, Paul from Chicago. Thank you, Michael Cooch. Thank you, Sejan90. Thank you, 9681. Mole's Revenge. Jacob, W570. Alt92. Sean Brennan. Thank you. Yes, the torpedoes did work. At least, well, not as bad as Bjord's, but they did work better than Bjord's. They weren't quite as good as the British ones in terms of reliability at the beginning of the war, but they got better quickly. Iceman, thank you. Andy Pewdler, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Runon. Thank you, Servant Krotu. And as said, I will be on the Discord. There is a link down below. I'll be in the general chat after I have gone off and had a little comfort break. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, History. Thank you, Sean, quickly. Thank you, everyone. Oh, where are my snacks? Where have my snacks gone? Have I eaten them all? But I had a load of cheesy biscuits. Where are they all gone? And cheese straws. They're all gone. All gone. That is terrible. That is terrible.